Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today it is time for my Week 6 review of the 2024 United Football League season. This week was one of the best we've seen in a little bit. The fact is that while we did have two games that were pretty much blowouts, we saw two of the best games of the entire season as well. We saw an upset for the first time in a while, and in terms of the TV numbers, they're good. They're damn good. So, without further ado, let's get right into it, the four scores this past weekend. Now, the first game between the Stallions and Showboats was one of those two blowouts. The final score was 39-21, and as we'll get to in a little bit, that score makes it closer than the game actually was. Then we saw the Roughnecks versus the Battlehawks, where the Battlehawks were able to win that game 22-8. The fact is that was actually a decently close game, but the Roughnecks offense did nothing the entire game, so it was more of a close game just on score, not really in overall feel. But then we had the two great games. The Panthers-Renegades game on May 5th is one of the best we've seen in spring football history, in my opinion. The game's ending was crazy. The amount of twists and turns was insane. The Panthers barely won it 28-27. And then finally, the Defenders versus Brahmas played another great game, which ended 18-12, the Defenders barely beating the Brahmas to go back to being this dominant team at home. So looking at the first game of the week between the Showboats and Stallions, just look at the total yards and you can pretty much tell exactly what happened this game. The Showboats just got absolutely obliterated. They once again played two quarterbacks. They once again had both quarterbacks not really play all that well, especially T-Will. They once again had running backs that didn't play insane, even though Victor once again is looking better than he did early in the season, but not as good as CJ Marable looked. Adrian Martinez put out the best performance of the week for a quarterback. His 23 of 36 attempts for 368 yards, 4 TDs, 0 picks is unbelievable. This game wasn't close. The Stallions just went out there and obliterated Memphis. There was a bunch of injuries in this game, but even then, the Stallions just were the better team. Memphis did put up 12 in the fourth quarter. At that point, it was already too little too late. So in the end, the Stallions won. An incredible performance by them. Stallions won. Then, of course, we had the Battlehawks versus Roughnecks, where again, the Roughnecks defense did its job. They held the Battlehawks offense to less than 300 total yards. Even if you get rid of the intentional safety, the minus 37-yard rush, even then they still held them under 300 yards. So the Houston defense did its job. It's just that the Houston offense didn't. Mark Thompson still does not look back into form. He'll have a good run here or there, but overall he was outplayed by TJ Pledger, and Reed Sinnett had one of his worst games of the season, if not his worst, going for 19 completions for just 135 yards and a 56 completion percentage. Whereas AJ McCarron, while he did throw one interception, he overall had a solid game, 255 yards and 24 completions, a 65 completion percentage. Really solid game. The running game was very weak. Both Sailors and Gallman really didn't do anything on the ground. So there was that, but the Battlehawks were still able to win this game pretty convincingly, despite the fact the final score was so close. It's just that the Roughnecks defense did its job, but it wasn't enough. The Roughnecks fumbled 3 times. Even though they only lost one of them, they still fumbled it 3 times. That doesn't help. But in the end, the Roughnecks lost. Battlehawks won. And now we're heading into next week with the Battlehawks versus the Stallions in what many people think will be game of the year. Then, first of the two big, close, insane games was the Renegades-Panthers. This game was crazy. The Renegades finally were able to actually put together a solid game, at least a solid quarter, where they were able to beat the Panthers in the second quarter 14-3, but the Panthers ended up winning the game. The overall total stats are pretty comparable. The Panthers were a bit behind in yards by 16, and they were 2 less third down conversions, but they didn't fail a fourth because they didn't do one, whereas the Renegades did, and that was the main reason that they lost. Not the main reason, but, we all know the main reason that was Jake Bates. Jake Bates went back to being a monster. Yes, the dome kicker allegations still live on, but the fact is that Jake Bates was unbelievable. 5 of 5, though he technically made 7 of 7 that officially counted. He did miss one, but that one didn't get counted. It's weird. The basic way to view it is that technically he had 7 kicks. All those plays went fully through. There was no stoppage before, the actual kick. But 2 of them, Renegades, had a penalty. The Panthers accepted it. And ironically enough, both those drives still ended in a Jake Bates field goal. He did have a 60-yarder that did count, and he did have a 42-yarder that won the game. One of the best kicking performances in spring football history. Right on up there with guys like Luis Aguilar last year or Matt Conklin. Insane performance. Marcus Sims had another deep shot, as well as he had a 39-yard reception. Then, of course, Danny Etling was really solid. I talked about it before in the power rankings. He is definitely looking like a better quarterback than E.J. Perry was. And while their rushing game was pretty poor, the Renegades was better, but the Renegades took a ton of injuries very late in the game. In the end, though, the Panthers were able to get a last-second field goal again. And with that, they are now all but guaranteed a playoff spot. and the Renegades are all but eliminated from the playoffs. And the last game was the first upset in a while. That was the Defenders upsetting the Brahmas 18-12. The ending was really crazy in this game. Before we get into that, the Defenders did technically beat them in a few stats, but it wasn't really statistically. It's not like one team got obliterated, except in the turnover differential where the Brahmas had 2, whereas the Defenders had 0. Now, in terms of QB play, Te'amu fully outplayed Dormade. Dormade did not look good this week. He had 79 yards and just 16 completions. You can blame that on whatever you want, but at the end of the day, that's what it is bad. Now, John Lovett had an outstanding performance. His true breakout game, 153 yards on the ground and 23 carries, is unbelievable, especially when his long was only 30, and I'm saying only. It was insane. He is now the leading rusher in the league. Insane. But Calvin Harmon also had his true breakout performance, 101 yards and a touchdown against the Brahmas is the huge reason they won. And Darius Higgins actually had a very solid game this past week. While I still don't fully trust the Defenders' rushing game, this was an overall strong week by them. But of course, for Brahmas fans, this game is going to be remembered by the ending. They were at 4th and 7. They decided to punt the ball. They were basically at midfield, almost, not exactly, but they were just 10 yards away. And they decided to punt it. They actually got, a stop, but there was almost no time left, and they decided to do this insanely just whack play call that tried to use all the rules that were in the league instead of just doing plays, and it backfired on them, and they lost the game. The decision to not go for it is a big one. Well, yes, you could argue that if they failed it, it would be bad, but at the same time, if they failed it there, they just needed to still stop the Defenders. It was a weird call, weird decision. I think they should have gone for it on 4th and 7. In the end, it didn't work. Brahmas lose. Now, in terms of the attendance, this week was a mixed bag. Now, the Defenders had an announced attendance of over 14,000, though we all know it was not 14,000 at the game. That was a definite enhanced by ticket distributed and ticket sales. But still, overall, it's still a good number. It still is technically up overall compared to what they did most of the year last year, or part of the year. Again, it's still better than 3 of their 5 regular season home games. So the Defenders' home crowd is still there, at least getting tickets and all that. The Battlehawks rebounded by over 1,000 after their last game in Week 4. While it's still not as good as their final game last year, where they had 33,000, it still is a rebound. It was only just 100 away, so, it still was a really solid number. And the average is still only, just a little bit behind last year. But, of course, the Panthers actually saw a nice rebound. A 500-fan rebound was solid. We did kind of expect this following the draft, following them still being a good team, and then winning at home. Wouldn't be shocked if they had another good, solid home game for the final home game of the season. Now, the Showboats, I talked about during the live stream, this was bad. 5,600. Now, it is true what some people are saying. This team is awful to watch. If you're a fan of this team, it's hard to actually put on a game. As a guy who's a Carolina Panthers fan, I can tell you that sometimes you just don't want to watch your team. That's basically this team. They're so hard to watch. They lose games in horrific fashion. So it's no surprise their attendance just keeps going down. If this team was better, I'd assume it would stay at above 7,000, which still isn't great, but it's better than 5,600, which is less than any game the XFL had last year. So while it is a massive fail, the fact is we still did see an increase for the Panthers and the Battlehawks. So overall, mixed bag in attendance. But the real W this week was the TV ratings. Oh my gosh, these were great. I was very skeptical on the TV ratings because of the fact that we're, especially now, basically know the 4 teams in the playoffs. Yes, the Defenders made it close, so there's really 5 teams vying for it. But at this point, we know the Panthers, Stallions, and Battlehawks are all but guaranteed. And then it's the Defenders, Brahmas. The TV ratings are great. The worst game was the Roughnecks Battlehawks on May 4th, surprisingly, at 830,000. Yes, there was some big competition, but still, that game was the worst of the season. And even then, that's still far better than, take Fox, for example, in Week 6 last year, which was, a couple weeks later time-wise. But their Fox games hit 730,000 and 630,000. So even then, this Fox game still far outperformed it. Then, of course, the ABC game had 960,000, which, while it's not as good as the Dragons-Guardians game Week 6 last year, it's far better than the 750,000 game between the Brahmas and Renegades last year. But then the 2 real big W's, the Brahmas Defenders hit 1.22 million. Think about that. That is the second best game of the entire season. We actually saw a Week 6 game do better than a Week 1 game. That was great. That's unheard of in the modern-day spring football age. The only game you ever expect to really do better is the championship game. To see that number is insane, and that's not even the best number overall. The best number was the peak viewership for the Renegades and Panthers. I don't have it up, but you can go look it up. The ending of the game had a peak viewership of 1.5 million people. Not a surprise at all. Look, some say it's because it was heading into the Brahmas Defenders game. That is not exactly why. Jake Bates, once again, trending on Twitter. He was having a monster game. He was having a chance to go win the game. No shock that it had a 1.5 million viewership at the end. And even aside from that, 930,000 on Fox is still an insane number to see. So when you look at the TV ratings for this past week, all 4 games are on broadcast TV, and it was not a disappointment. This was not like the USFL last year where we saw weeks that were overall disappointments. This was an incredible week of TV ratings. Your worst game was 830,000, which is still better than what one of the ABC and one of the Fox games were last week in Week 6 for either league. That's insane. I mean, it is. The Panthers-Renegades game having that 1.5 million, also incredible. The TV ratings, there's really nothing negative to say. There isn't. I mean, people are joking that, negative haters have nothing to say, and it's true. There is nothing you can say bad about these numbers. They were overall insane. They did far better than what either league did last year, either at this point or even, time-wise the same time, May 4th, May 5th, that kind of week. It's insane. Overall TV ratings were unbelievable. Massive success, massive W. Hopefully this next week continues that, especially because we have the massive Battlehawks versus Stallions game, as well as the second Tank Bowl of the season. But we'll see, because now with the Defenders and Brahmas both actually having games that matter, and the fact that they're both playing different teams, maybe we see another week with really solid ratings. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw 3 games with great ratings, and the Tank Bowl probably not, but we'll see. So overall, this has been ZomFox. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new here, if you enjoyed this content as well, and like the video. I do at least 4 UFL videos a week, as well as 1 weekly short. Later in the week, I will be posting the playoff scenarios that can happen this week. Last week, I posted them very late, basically right before the first games. This time, I'm going to probably post them on Friday, as we should have a couple that can happen, especially the Renegades getting eliminated. So be on the lookout for that. And I will have another expansion video coming out tomorrow. That is going to be 5 reasons why the UFL should expand in 2026. And if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a channel member for 99 cents a month as the lowest price. You get an exclusive video every month, as well as many other benefits. And as always, have a great night.